Morning, and welcome back to day 3 of Pacific Women's 6th Annual Learning Workshop. Today's panel discussion will be on women's economic empowerment and COVID-19. Now, on our panel today, we have our moderator, Ms. Elizabeth Asigau. She is the programs manager with the PNG Business Coalition for Women. We also have Ms. Kaugla. She is the gender officer with Gender Equity Desk, NCDC, a position she has held for the past 22 years. In this role, she coordinates the implementation of women's empowerment programs in NCD. Also on our panel, Brenda Andrias. Ms. Brenda Andrias is the program manager of UN Women's Safe and Prosperous Districts and Markets Economic Recovery and Inclusion Program. Joining us online, Ms. Webb. She is the country director for the Center for International Private Enterprise, that's CIPE's program in Papua New Guinea. And Mr. Yaninen. He is the president of the PNG MSME Council and has been an outspoken advocate for SME development in PNG for over a decade. We also have available for you additional resources. You can check out the pacificwomen.org website. We've got what works for gender transformative approaches in Papua New Guinea, Pacific Women in Papua New Guinea Performance Report from 2012 to 2021, and promoting gender equality in Papua New Guinea.
Good morning, everybody. So just to start, just to remind ourselves about the topic, our topic is women's economic empowerment and COVID-19. So since the first hit of COVID-19, different groups of people have faced different impacts. So today, in this pandemic, we're seeing the importance of the informal economy and small businesses, especially understanding that a lot of women are involved in these informal economies and the SME sector. So I'm going to start our discussion and throw a question to all the panelists. How resilient is the environment in supporting women who are trading in the informal economy and owning and running small businesses? Who would like to open? Brenda?
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Can you all hear me clearly? Okay, thank you. So basically, I think in order to understand how resilient the environment is, we also need to just have a sense of the context of the informal economy. So we all know that when we're talking about the informal economy, we're referring to the sector that is often unregulated and operating outside the formal economy. So we're looking at activities that trading and business activities that occur in markets, street vending, small trading activities, and other activities that are not formally registered business activities. So within, in the context in which we will be, myself and most likely Kay as well, because we work together on a lot of the work in the informal economy, we are looking specifically at the context of markets and women who operate within markets. So markets are a very small part of the informal economy. They don't comprise the entire sector. So you would probably know that there had been major impacts during COVID. In terms of particularly the most striking one is the income levels for a lot of women who actually depend on the informal economy. So just to give you a sense of how big the sector is, annually it generates around 12 billion every year. This is all the activities such as betel nut trading, such as market vending activities, street vending, informal trading activities, and others as well. So you can already imagine how important it is to the overall country's economy. and the number of people who actually depend on the sector, the informal economy. So we did some assessments across markets in Papua New Guinea where we work, and we did record over 50% reductions in income levels for market vendors. So this 50% reduction in income led to, a series of consequences for families who depend on that income. And our statistics also showed in the last informal economy audit that at the moment we have 60% of the participants or workers in the informal economy are women, and 40% are men. 10 years ago, the numbers were quite different. We were looking at around 80% of participants being women. But the sector has really gradually attracted a lot more male participation. So 60% of which are women who depend solely on the informal economy for their income. So in terms of resilience, and maybe later I can come back to some of the statistics, but I would say that based on what we have seen throughout, there has been some limitations in terms of the support that exists for women in that space. While there are some support or social safety nets, most of it is informal. There is no formal mechanisms in which participants of that space, workers of the informal economy, can actually seek financial support. There are microbanks who provide services for those workers to recover and rebuild their businesses. But often, most of them are unprotected and are not able to access the formal support that, most through the government and, other institutions. So I would say that in terms of resilience, we have a long way to go to build ourselves up to be able to support and provide relief during times of pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Brenda. Des or Ellie, do you want to add anything? So the question again is, how resilient is the environment in supporting women who are trading in the informal economy and owning and running small businesses, especially in this pandemic time with COVID-19? Who's going, Ellie or Des? Ellie, maybe we can hear from you.
Yeah.
Okay, while waiting to connect with Ellie, Des, do you want to go? Share some insights on resilience.
I was just going to mention that one of the biggest issues that we had to deal with last year with the lockdowns was the fact that we had closures of markets, and because this was the first time we'd ever have a pandemic in Papua New Guinea, we really didn't know how to sort of deal with it. So we had these blanket closures right across the nation, right across Port Moresby. And one of the things that we observed from the MSME Council perspective was that in police brutality, and there were a lot of women who were getting their markets destroyed, and they weren't trading in anything that was illicit. They were selling vegetables. They were selling, the basic necessities that people that we require, and we thought that was wrong. So I met with at the time the Met Soup of NCD, and I mentioned that we should be really looking back at cutting back on all the police brutality that our women are facing, and that was something that they took note of, and it was a big issue. So the main thing that we advocated from the MSME Council perspective was to lift the lockdowns, to reopen markets, and to ensure that we would practice the new normal mechanisms, the social distancing, the face masks, the hand sanitizers, that sort of thing. So in terms of resilience, women have been tremendously resilient. I mean, it's just amazing how we've been able to cope. Certainly, I've got figures from the formal sector, and I'll probably share that at another time in this panel discussion. But it's just, with the informal sector, you had no support. You couldn't go to banks for a loan. You couldn't get any support from the government. You couldn't go anywhere. And the fact that we've been able to wear the loss of business from the COVID-19 period, and then to come out from that and grow and continue to survive, and some have actually thrived, really speaks to the resilience of women. One of the businesses that I've seen really boom during the COVID-19 period was the making of face masks. And from some of the women retailers that have spoken to, it cost them less than a kina to make a face mask, probably between 50 toy to a kina to make a face mask. And then they were able to sell that for 5-10 kina. So there's been, women that have profited tremendously from the COVID-19 period through the making of face masks. And that was one thing that I saw, that women were really able to come out during the COVID-19 period and make a lot of money from. But I guess just that observation that shutting down the markets wasn't a good thing. So we really had to push for the lockdowns to be lifted and for everything to get back to the new normal, which is the social distancing and the face masks.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add as well that looking at COVID-19, even though COVID-19 had disrupted a lot of business lines that people were into, like the vegetable and the betel nut and other informal lines of business, they were still able to, women are very creative with coming up with other business ideas as well, like Des mentioned, coming up with the face masks and other opportunities. So we're able to creatively think about what other ways that we can be continue to run that business and generate money for our families as well. So that was a really good example with the face masks. And then it's only one product, one face mask, but you had it in different forms. You have them labeling them, you have them in provincial flags. So it really increased that market. So I think, selling face masks was one way that women could keep resilient, but there are other factors as well that we can consider when thinking about resilience. So just looking back at the market space, I'm going to ask Ms. Kaugla your first question. So a lot of Papua New Guineans thrive on informal economy, and markets are an avenue for this informal economy. With NCDC, how has NCDC managed to keep these markets open in terms of the practical safety measures put in place at the marketplace for both buyers and for sellers?
Thank you. COVID-19 since early last year brought a lot of fear among our vendors in the market and informal workers. This is a new kind of thing that came into the country, and with no awareness at the beginning and the fear that came into the market. And market, you see, is a place where people come together to get their food and all that. People come in from all areas of the city. So it brought a lot of fear in the early month of last year. And our fear at the NCDC management was that, what if a vendor is, contracted COVID-19 and they'll tell us to close the market. This is the fear we have in all our markets in the city. And knowing that market is the only place that supplies the city apart from all the big supermarket and stores, we did our very best to do awareness. We did our very best to supply. And what we did at the market was We also have vendors associations whom we've already organized and working with them. Cooperated Yes, our measures of COVID-19 was that all gates, we have the PA system in all markets, that we have continuous awareness. We have our staff on the ground who are working with the securities. When people walk through the gate, they have to have masks and sanitizer. We talk with our vendors. We did everything to the best of our ability to tell the people that we don't want to hear that a vendor is contracted the virus. So we did our best with the support of women coming on board. And another thing in the market is that we have different seasons, like you have Christmas, how people come into the market, and the COVID-19. The challenges were that people back in the village couldn't supply because of the COVID-19, and the supply of vegetables in the market ran low, and the prices went up again. That's one. Another thing is that when we have a supply from the village coming in, things went well with our women. The other thing we found out was that PNG people, they see and they believe in things. So they think that how can this thing kill us? We are still alive. We are still moving around. No one is infected with the virus and all that. And people continue to live their life. But our mothers in the market during that time, with the challenges of food, sometimes it doesn't come in from the village. But one thing we saw during the COVID-19 was that mothers make good money. All right, that is, there are some things that like lemon, the gingers and the garlic. During that time, one lemon, they used to sell like 3 or 4 lemons for 1 kina. They sell 1 lemon for 2 kina. So we can clearly see that it also helps our women in terms of building their market. They earn good money during that time. And because we have this everything set up to do our awareness, COVID-19 strict regulations in the market that helped us. And from the market itself, and those of us looking after the informal workers, we were in fear that anything can happen because market is the base and is the life and is the lifeline of supplying the city. And our fear was that, but we came through and we made it through, and we saw that women were okay during that time. And a few, because of COVID-19, they left their space and they went out. And a few that most of them stayed back and they continue their market. And yeah.
Thank you. Would you just thinking about like during that COVID time, we had this like big scare and people were going into shops and bulk shopping. Would you say that, bulk shopping, and then we also had this idea about keeping our health, being health conscious, and like the example you gave with the lime, did that pose as, and with these measures that you put in place in the market, did you see if people were coming more to buy from the markets, which was benefiting some of the women, even if the prices were increasing? Would you say that people were accessing more like organic products from the market? And was this one way that was helping to increase that?
People, during that early time, people were thinking market could close any time. So they come in to buy bulk of vegetables, whatever they want in the market, and that helps our women. They make good money during that time. I've gone around to the tables and talked to them, interviewed them, and they said, oh, we are okay, there's no problem. And our prevention part was we give them a mask. We supply them all the PPEs to wash their hands, to sanitize themselves, to space themselves. Market is built in a way that they're 1 meter apart from each other, so they were nicely placed in the market. And we've been working with them for a long time, so our communications with them was good, that they understand us and they worked with us. And that has helped our mothers. They said, oh, we don't worry about COVID-19. We're also making money too. Though we face challenge with the supply of vegetables coming from Central Province and other areas, and outside the market, but they are still good, and I don't see anything wrong with that.
Okay, thank you. So we'll just, I'd like to go to you, Brenda. So in your line of work as well, you UN supports the different markets in Port Moresby. So you're managing 15 markets in 11 provinces. So in terms of gender and infrastructure, what does this look like in actual market infrastructure development?
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. I think before I go into that, I just quickly want to touch on a point that I missed related to the markets and impact of COVID-19. I think the example that Kay has presented is a case where the government responded appropriately and did provide the mechanisms to keep markets operational. In other markets where we did see closure of markets, it was a different story in terms of income levels. So just to understand, the context was different everywhere. So it really goes to show the response mechanisms that are in place at the local and subnational levels that really impacted how resilient people were able, and how they could deal with the impacts. So in terms of gender and infrastructure development, so UN Women, we've been working within the market space and working with NCDC for a while. So initially our program integrated a lot more infrastructure development with the rehabilitation of some markets like the Gerahu market and the most recently Open Gordon's market. So because that space and a lot of spaces, mostly markets are dominated by women, you'd find that over 80% of the users, either as market vendors or consumers, are women. And so that is a space that they use most often. So when we are designing such a space, you need to be able to consider their views throughout the entire process of constructing a market. So some of the things that we have been able to identify and we've put together into a toolkit that's available for others who are working in markets is how you actually integrate women's voices throughout the entire design preparation stage for constructing markets, including them in the design, the modeling of the market itself, looking at where you position practical things like lighting, water and sanitation, and collecting basic data that shows you how many facilities are required. So you're designing the space for the users. So they need to be included in the concept stage. And practically how we've been working with the local governments to do this is at the preparation stage, you're looking at data collections, like pre-occupancy surveys. Some of the things we do, we come up with relocation arrangements. So when you're constructing a market, you need to be able to move the existing users of that space into another location. And in cases like this, you have some users that will be pushed out of the temporary space. So you need to have strategies for that. You also need to understand wholesaling arrangement because it can be quite chaotic and it does cause a lot of harm for women, particularly those coming in from rural areas who are selling in bulk and who would like to trade, to gain maximum profit. There are often aggressive tactics used to secure those goods. And then at the design stage, really looking at practical things like how do you cater for the number of users. Obviously, you'd have to have more toilet facilities for females because there's more female users in markets. In some cases, markets do look at provision for children, but it's different in different contexts. We've seen some cases where child playgrounds have been built but not used due to a number of reasons, like parents being concerned about their children's safety and all that. So other programs look at early learning initiatives for children who often accompany their parents or their mothers to the market. And then I think what it's really practical things. It's looking at the physical building and how it caters for the needs of the users, the women, enhancing their safety, visibility, so that they're able to there's natural security happening at the market, access to the market. So one of the biggest lessons we've also learned through our work is that where you place the bus stops, they are very much linked. So a lot of the women who operate in the markets use public transport for transporting their goods. So you need to be able to make it convenient. Otherwise, you can build a market and nobody's going to use it. And then also provisions for people with disabilities, looking at ramps and things that are accessible. And after the building or the market infrastructure is completed, you need to look at things like, are they actually making money? Because you're not building markets for the sake of building markets. It's a trading space, right? So the users, they need to be able to generate money and make a profit. So things like the fee payment, is it allowing people to make profit or not? Some markets overcharge their vendors, so the costs of doing business are quite high. At the end of the day, the take home after you take out transportation, accommodation, overnight lodging, all the other associated costs of trading, some vendors go home with nothing. So there's a whole process to be considered from construction to at the end of the project. Over.
And do you think that with the construction of the new gardens market, this has helped to support women's economic empowerment with the users and vendors and the consumers?
It has helped a lot. Not like the old market. This market is it's built in a way that everybody can see everyone in the market. It's big, it is open. And like Brenda said, during the planning and design of the market, we were also included to tell the designers what we want in the market. So it is our choice, the women's choice, because we said women will be using the market. Whatever you plan to design and build a market, we have to give you what we want in the market. So it was designed in a way that we all agreed. And women are happy. There's no space for illegal activities, petty crimes in the market. It's a beautiful market, and women are now happy and enjoying themselves.
Thank you. Okay, so Ellie, CIPE conducted a survey of impact on COVID-19 on women-led SMEs in 2020. Can you tell us what were the main results of this survey and the impact of COVID-19 on women-led SMEs?
Sure. Can you hear me clearly? It's all good? Yes. Yeah? Sorry, I'm just going to talk fast because my connectivity is very unstable. We did conduct a survey. This was based on the fact that we were getting a lot of feedback when we were redesigning programs to be able to cope with the pandemic and the fact that it had, drastically shifted the environment for women who are operating in businesses. It's already quite, challenging for our women in Papua New Guinea. But then, of course, with the pandemic, the impact to being able to move around, to being able to access their supply chains and value chains, to being able to, provide the same cost factor they have to their services and goods because of the fact that people just weren't spending the same.
We're losing Ellie.
I'm just going to keep talking, and then if someone tells me to stop, I'll stop.
Yeah.
Basically, with the survey, we set ourselves a very high target of being able to speak to a couple of hundred women. When you look at a snapshot for a survey, you need to make sure that the actual component of who you're talking to is going to be a good representation, I guess. And so we ended up speaking to just over 300 women, women-owned businesses, and varying levels of their businesses, and the disproportionate effects that COVID had on them, based on whether they were formal or informal, varied. Like they've mentioned, there were a lot of businesses that thrived, whether it was a case of being able to pivot what they were actually providing versus, stoppages. Then, of course, you had women who didn't need to stop, but this access to information around what was out there. There was very limited support anyway with COVID from, government. It was something that was unprecedented, and we fight for this support as it is. But what we were finding is access to information was one of the biggest inhibitors, finding out where they can, access some of this funding. The government had released budgets around, supporting our SMEs, but in terms of making it accessible, the information, as well as making it really practical for them to be able to apply. We have such a huge informal sector. And so, when we spoke to a lot of these women, some of our findings were things that are not new, but I guess it shaped the way that us as in CIPE and all of our development partners should be really pushing government and private sector to redesign what we're implementing to really address, what would seem simple in terms of the information access and education access and so forth, but actually it's not. The practicality and the cost of doing such, can also be quite a big barrier as well. I'm just going to quickly zip down to where it was, just so I can, look at what we had shared. And Des was part of this about, what it was that we actually found in the learnings from the survey. So, obviously it found that, 83.2% of women participating in our survey, so not in business, but in our survey, were negatively impacted by the pandemic. We had about, just over half, so 56%, 56.4% that experiencing significant problems, but 26.8% reported temporary closure. So not full closure, but temporary closure. Of course, this means how do they get their money in to actually survive at the same time? Interestingly, though,
Okay. While we, sorry, Ellie, we're having connectivity issues with you. So we'll just quickly go to Des. And Ellie did mention that you were part of this survey that they conducted. But maybe you can also share with us a bit about the PNG MSME Council, or you can also share with us an update on the SME's policy on the reserve businesses for Papua New Guinea and how this is progressing.
Findings from a more, I'll probably paint an overview of how SMEs and businesses in general fared last year as an impact of COVID-19. So just overall, Ellie, as soon as you come back on, just say something so I can probably give the floor back to you, moderator, if that's okay. But just in general, revenue for SMEs, both male and female, fell by between 50 to 90%. And it was due to the lockdown, lack of customers, lack of access to the ability to trade. Their customers reduced by over 50%. Prices of goods and services went up. 7,000 employees lost their jobs, and this was in the government sector. 35% of all households experienced at least one job loss. So that's quite significant. So you're seeing that out of every 10 households, at least there were 3 houses that had that lost jobs. Travel and tourism, for example, they lost 97% of their income. So when you're looking at this, for example, all of the women that make arts and crafts that they supply to little guest houses and hotels, during the time that there wasn't any travel or tourism happening, I'm sure that these women would have been impacted as well. 50% of households with debt struggled to service their loans during the COVID lockdowns. And 90% of all businesses reported receiving no formal assistance from the government. So 90% of all businesses last year didn't receive any form of assistance from the government. And that's according to the United Nations Socioeconomic Impact Survey that was published. 66% of businesses with loans, they struggled to repay those loans. Some of them, they asked for loans to help them get through the COVID period, and they had the loans declined. When we're looking at employment, only 3% of organizations within Papua New Guinea were able to maintain their employment levels. That means that 97% of employers in Papua New Guinea did some form of wage reduction. So this includes they cut pay, they reduced working hours. 70% of firms laid off staff, whether it's a lot of staff or just some staff. There was a huge layoff that happened last year. And there were so many things that happened. There was also anecdotal evidence of a number of things. There was an increase in petty crime. People were, the criminals that were caught by the police, when they were asked why they were stealing, they said they just wanted food to eat. Charles Abel, member for so mentioned that in Alata they saw an increase in prostitution during the COVID-19 period. And of course, I mentioned police brutality of informal sector women, particularly. So there are all of these things that we saw last year. And one of the questions that one of the panelists that came to us panelists is that if there's going to be another COVID-19 lockdown, how's the government going to respond to it? Well, at present, for 2020 at least, most of the government's response was directed at formal sector. So you need to be formally registered. You need to have a business name. You need to have a tax identification number in order for you to access these COVID-19 concessional SME loans from the government. There was about 2 million kina each that was allocated to each district. And that 2 million kina for every district was designed, was for MSMEs, was for the district to improve markets, provide water, sanitation, face masks, that sort of thing to all the markets. But it was also designed to improve access to markets for a lot of these informal sector participants that were struggling during that time. The problem is there is no accountability for the 2 million kina that was paid out to all members of parliament. So no one knows how the money was used. So that to me is a big challenge. When we're looking at disbursement, we can't go around giving money to members of parliament or to provincial government for them to disperse, because we don't know how the money is getting used. So if there's going to be another surge in COVID-19 here in Papua New Guinea, the money should not be disbursed through political office holders. There should be another disbursement mechanism for it.
So thank you, Des. And I know Ellie dropped out in connectivity, but she's joining us via phone. So just before, interesting topics run really quickly with time. So just before we go to Q&A, I just wanted if Ellie could share something. So really quickly, Ellie, with some of the results from the survey, what were some positive recommendations to support women's economic empowerment in this COVID-19 period? What are some good recommendations that came about? Or some good recommendations that we can to support?
Yeah. So essentially, what we used it primarily was, women with lower education levels were more likely to operate unregistered businesses, have it disproportionately impacted. While we look at both formal and informal businesses, or registered and unregistered, they actually face equally significant problems. But unregistered are likely to temporarily halt. Coping mechanisms are not as strong. Our community is incredibly resilient, but in terms of coping mechanisms of where do they find the next kina to pay the easy pay, that's difficult because they get used to doing a particular type of business. The family obligations come in with what they're able, whether it's cooking, selling, catering, whatever the case may be, or providing service. The needs for learning were different based on various factors, including registration of those businesses, obviously, which is an ongoing need, but also needs for learning around how to be more resilient again and how to learn how to be in and how to access things, in this digital space, which has become far more prevalent than it ever has in terms of providing that support for women to operate business and have that access to market and supply and so forth. So the really exciting thing that came out of, particularly for us as a implementing facilitator, was that we were able to start designing programs, because one of the key things that came out was people were so excited to be heard. They were happy that people were spending time to talk to them and hear what their individual anecdotal situations were, who was getting impacted by higher levels of violence in the home, who was getting impacted by the fact that because the kids can't go to school because there's no PMVs, they've got more bodies in the house. So keeping up with sanitation concerns and health concerns and how do they access good health services? There was all these different facets besides the actual economic data that we were capturing. We were able to then look at designing programs that were going to meet this need. One of them was to continue doing this type of a survey. And so having been commissioned to making sure that we're committing budget time, HR, to ensure that we run a survey on a yearly basis. And because COVID's here to stay, COVID's not going anywhere. And we're going to be able to, yes, we can shift with Nupla Pasim, but our economic space is not going to shift as quickly as everything else. We don't have appropriate social security mechanisms, our health services struggle and so forth. So, being commissioned to make sure that we are going to commit time to talking to people. What then happened also was this design that we looked at. Are we still on? I've just lost.
Yeah, you're still.
You are still on.
Could you
okay,
summarize?
great.
2 minutes to summarize, please, Ali.
Yeah, sure. So when we're examining the findings, basically to better understand this environment, then the directive programs that are going to fit. One of them was creating a business coaching, platform. We looked at redesigning the way that we were going to access high-level coaches from overseas to put capacity build for Papua New Guinean coaches to learn what that looks like, what this high-level business coaching looks like. And this is not just specific to formal businesses. It just, there's obviously matrix and criteria for which businesses fit. But we've now started this program of looking at 100 businesses. We're in our second iteration now where we're doing coaching around this deep dive into how they can actually cope through something like COVID. Launching what we call a business advisory hotline. Now, we've started doing a lot of work on this. Our official launch is in a couple of weeks and everybody will be made aware of that. And this is around getting a really good referral hub. The Women's Business Resource Centre has always been fantastic as a great resource hub and a good central spot that people can come in and find out information, access training, networking, with COVID, people can't move around, and we still need to make it so it's not Port Moresby-centric anymore. You know, COVID affects the entire country. So this business advisory hotline, again, it's about committing funds, HR, capacity build in country to ensure that people are calling in and they can get this information by a phone call, you know, that's going to be not cost inhibitive for them. And then, of course, commissioning ourselves to make sure that we run a survey like this. We were very excited with the numbers of, one, the amount of people that we spoke to and the varied type of statistics. The COVID survey results from last year are available. I'm happy to share that with whoever needs, and it's also on our website. And then, of course, we've just completed our 2021 survey. So we'll be sharing the findings for that as well in this in the next couple of weeks after we've polished up and made it pretty. But I guess the key thing is, you know, recommendations for this entrepreneurial ecosystem to support this resilience for women entrepreneurs in PNG. You know, we need to look at diversifying and improving these learning opportunities for women entrepreneurs at all stages of business. We can't just continuously go back and say, we're only going to look at women who have registered businesses. Yes, we want to encourage them to become formalized. So they're accessing, well, not just because they're paying tax, but they're accessing, you know, available funding opportunities. Oh, one other thing that I forgot to mention was we have been spending a lot of time around the proof of concept of, you know, designing programs where women are taught how to access non-conventional funding. So opportunities through donors, through grants, you know, there's so many of them throughout the region. And, you know, helping women design their businesses so they have a social impact, because it gives them an opportunity to access this type of funding, this pool of funding that a lot of people don't know about. So, you know, when we're looking at increasing channels of information, I'm so sorry I'm talking fast, but I'm so scared the connectivity is going to cut off again. Increasing channels of information for women entrepreneurs through cost-effective methods, ensuring that access to information is affordable, it's practical. You know, we have so many obstacles in terms of our lower literacy, but also we cannot forget our minority groups, our people with disability. This access to information, is it there for the deaf community? Is it there for the blind community? These people are entrepreneurs as well. And, you know, increasing women's participation in the economic decision-making, access to information around what source of support and available financial assistance. This really requires commitment, big commitment from stakeholders, including development donors, community organisations, our government and private sector. So I hope that kind of ties in, you know, with regards to the survey, the reasons why we decided to do a survey, what came out of it, what we were able to do with our particular programs to design that, to make sure that ours was going to, you know, what we were providing. Our existing programs where we interface with this new Plapasin, they're continuing and they're growing exponentially. But we have to shift, you know, to this digital space. Don't make it Port Moresby-centric. Make sure that we are providing a resource that's really practical. And the one thing that all of our women told us out of the 4,500 people that we tried to contact and spoke to a massive, you know, 300 women, they want to be heard. They want someone to call them and ask the questions. And how does it look for you? They're not looking for cash handouts, but they just don't have the information. So I'm going to stop there because I feel like I'm talking to you.
Thank you, Ellie. And we concur with all of what you're saying. And I think also, like when you were talking about giving people a voice, I think that's what Brenda expanded on with like the designing and infrastructure and giving it that gender lens. And also what Kay talked about with, you know, making it accessible and providing that awareness and information, not only about, you know, awareness about COVID, but also making it, providing that space for women to share, you know, what is causing them to, what are the barriers, what are causes for them not to access this kind of information or increase their business opportunities. So it's really, really interesting discussions, but we are running a little into time. So what we're going to do is we're going to open the floor to questions so that our participants can participate as well. For our physical participants, there are sticky notes that you can write your questions to and pass it on to the team to share. And our online participants, if you could write it in the chat box, and it will be vetted and shared with us to ask. So I'm going to open the discussions to the participants for questions. Okay, so we already have some questions. So this question is for Des. It says, "Hi Des, my name is Claire Guria and I am a deaf woman. As a man who has helped a lot of women venturing into SME, what advice would you give to a woman with disability who wants to use her passion to start a business but lack the confidence?
Great. That's an excellent question. Thanks, Clay. So what I do know is that there is, in the 2021 budget, there is a small funding allocation that's been allocated to the Department of Community Development for people with disabilities, and that's sort of to support them to get into business, that sort of thing. From memory, I think it's probably around 300,000 kina, but I'm going to have to confirm. So I'd like to encourage you and certainly all people with disabilities to call into the community development office where you are and just look at what programs they have for you. So it's really important that, particularly for people with disabilities, that we recognize that they are a group to be assisted, and they have special requirements as well. So it's really important that we are able to appreciate that and acknowledge that. So community development has a special program. I've cited it in the 2021 budget, so you can check with there. And I believe that we've got to do more for this sector. Right now, for example, the National Development Bank, they've got a specific loan product for women, for youth, and for people for people in Bougainville, and that's where it ends. And there's another one for agriculture, but there is no specific loan product for people with disabilities. So that's definitely something that we've been talking about for a number of years, and we'll continue to advocate that there be a special line of assistance, whether it's funding, technical support for women with disabilities in Papua New Guinea. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a question from Tonga. Okay, a question from Tonga. Do you think formal businesses receive more support than informal sector, given both sectors suffered during the pandemic? I believe anyone can answer. Brenda, I'm looking at you.
Okay. Well, I think I can generally speak about the informal sector. I think where there have been some formal support is where groups have been able to actually mobilize into formal associations. So we've seen that, as Kay mentioned, in the markets, they have what they call vendors associations. I believe there's over 70 plus vendors association across Port Moresby markets. And they've gone through the IPA process of registration, obtaining numbers. So through that, there are some support available through the microbanks. Some of these groups have already been accessing group loans. They have products that are quite low in terms of interest rates, and they're able to repay. So there's different groups that are accessing it, but generally there is limited support for those within the informal economy. But I'd like to maybe give the mic to Kay, because what's happening in NCDC is a good practice that needs to inform what we do elsewhere. It's really the government actually taking ownership and putting in place it's like cash transfer programs where you have engagement of communities to be involved in community activities like cleaning. You might see around Port Moresby where you have community groups that are actually doing beautification programs and all that, and they are being paid by the government. So these are some of the informal social mechanisms that are in place, and some of the formal mechanisms in which the government is trying to assist vulnerable communities. But ultimately, I guess the impacts were different, depending on which socio-economic background you come from. So, Kay, maybe you can talk a bit about that and the SME Service Center.
Thank you. To support the informal economy, during the COVID-19, we also assisted them to give them little cleaning contracts. to help them, to help their vendors association and their little groups, so that helps them to carry on from there during the COVID-19. So what we have also seen is that this COVID-19 pandemic, it has also changed the mindset of people. It has also changed the mindset of people from, like before to now, seeing that the pandemic is, is here in the city, and after a lot of awareness, people have now seen that, we have to change, we have to listen to the authority and work with them for the, betterment of our lives in the market. So this has changed a lot of vendors' mindset in the market, and I've seen that, and also okay. Another thing is that talking about SME is a lot of story all throughout the country, and what we are doing in the markets and at NCDC is that. We are also setting up our SME service center under the leadership of our good governor. And the center is yet to be established, and it will be housed in one of the offices at City Hall. Okay, the center is now going to work with informal economy workers. And we have products that are in place. The revolving fund, we are working with the women's groups to assist them. And also we have incentives. Our priority also goes to seeing women saving up. The savings culture is very important that we are giving priority to. And this will also help them. We're also looking at women in the market, out on the street, and women who are already into SMEs and have the IPA and an idea what the TIN number. So our services are free, and it goes out to all the women in the city.
Thank you. I think this is our last question. So it says, urbanization is fast growing in PNG. Apart from DSIP funding, what specific support is available at local levels for informal and formal businesses? Who'd like to answer that? Des, can you answer this question? I'll just read it again.
I think,
oh, you got the question?
No, I think the question was just answered by the previous speaker from NCDC. They've given an example of the initiatives that NCDC was doing for women in Port Moresby, and I think that's a good template that can be rolled out around Papua New Guinea when you're looking at things like having vendor associations. That's something that NCDC is doing, and it certainly could be useful to have that in other provinces and markets throughout Papua New Guinea. Having a vendor association helps to understand bring the vendors together as a collective, and because they're all informal sector, when you're formally registered as a vendor association, and go ahead and register a cooperative society. So once you're registered like that, then you're able to access more formal type assistance. There's also, in that group, you're also able to, as one of the speakers mentioned, you're able to access some loan facilities from microbanks, that sort of thing. So yes, I think the template is certainly something that can be replicated around the country, and it's up to the various city authorities, town authorities throughout Papua New Guinea to I guess, take a leaf out of what is happening here. And I think the United Nations, I think what you mentioned that you have something like 11 markets in 15 provinces. So I think there's certainly lessons that you can learn from Port Moresby and roll that out nationwide.
Okay. All right. So very interesting discussions. we're going to close and summarize really quickly. So our topic, again, is women's economic empowerment and COVID-19, and we're trying to understand the importance of investing in women's economic empowerment, especially during COVID-19, or its relevance to COVID-19. So just really quickly, some of the points that were mentioned here is just to understand that there are, in these two sectors, women are mostly employed in these two sectors. So what can we be doing, understanding all the different impacts, negative impacts that have been mentioned today by our various panel speakers? What are some things that we can be doing to be encouraging women's economic empowerment, especially in this time and day of COVID-19? So like from the market, some of our interventions or recommendations were to create those vendor associations and also to support, I mean, it is by choice, but informal sector do have the choice of going to micro banks to access low interest rates to support them during this time. And Kay did also mention about the SME service centers that will be developed in NCD, and supporting Des's comment about filtering that into the other provinces with the other markets. So that's encouraging a savings culture, and also supporting the cash transfer programs for different informal or SME businesses with different beautification projects and cleaning contracts and others. It also identified that even in COVID-19, we have had, or mostly women have had, the chance to be creative in addressing different business lines with the example of the masks. And it has also encouraged, you know, with COVID-19 and all the different health impacts, a lot of people are more encouraged to access that organic produce that's available in the markets. Even though the prices have increased, people are still encouraged to be accessing those organic products, and that does increase profits for women households. So if you do have any more comments, or you'd like to access any other documents that, you know, Des has talked about, or the survey that Ellie has talked about, I think that's available. You can access it through Pacific Women as well. But in the interest of time, I'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you, Ms. Kay Kaugla. Thank you, Ms. Brenda Andrias, Ms. Ellie Webb, and Mr. Des Yaninen for participating in our panel today. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. Cheers.